Today on NewsWatch, Islamic terrorism is spreading in Europe. We'll show you where ISIS is expected to hit next and what's being done to prevent an attack. Plus, severe weather unleashes tornadoes in several southern states. See how residents are working to clean up after storms. And
I felt like this was a mission for me to go on and to, stand up for my beliefs and be a little bit louder about my faith.
the stars from God's Not Dead 2 speak out. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Charlene Aaron. There are reports that the Islamic State has chosen a new target, and that target could be Great Britain. Dale Hurd has the story.
British intelligence is tracking more than 50 jihadis, reported to be planning more than 20 terror attacks against the United Kingdom. Coming after the attacks in Brussels and Paris, a report in the Sun newspaper shows that the Islamic State wants to prove it can strike any major capital, and it has authorities playing catch-up.
This is the most serious terrorist threat we've faced in Europe for at least a decade. And even in the last 6 months, I think, we're faced by a determined new strategy by Islamic State to take the fight to Europe, to our streets, with a more aggressive form of international terrorism.
Even though counterterrorism officials have been tracking potential terrorists, it's clear now that they underestimated the size and scope of the terror network. Reports indicate at least 50 ISIS supporters are working as baggage handlers, cleaners, and catering staff at Brussels Airport, with security badges and access to planes. Airport police say they warned about this before the attack.
We are working with a fragmented picture of this dispersed network of terrorists. At least 5,000 European nationals that we think have been radicalized by IS have gone to Syria and Iraq, some of whom have come back. Very difficult to monitor all of them all of the time. Very difficult to identify always who the real terrorists are.
And the terror threat is taking a new toll on France. One report says a lot of the wealthy are leaving. Taxes were already too high. But now they're afraid of Islamic terrorism too. The Brussels attacks have been yet another wake-up call for Europe, but there are signs that the European left has still not gotten the message. After the Brussels attack, there have been several articles in the media with liberal intellectuals blaming the terrorism on how European society is unfair and inhumane to Muslims, and not on radical Islam itself. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Iraqi forces have been stalled while battling ISIS in the town west of Baghdad. Tens of thousands of innocent civilians are trapped in the middle of the battle for the town of Hit, just 85 miles from the capital. Iraq's elite counterterrorism force had to stop fighting to avoid killing all those civilians. Now they're working to evacuate the families. During the past 2 years, the war against the Islamic State has taken a toll on the people of Iraq. According to the United Nations, nearly 19,000 Iraqis have been killed and 36,000 wounded from the start of 2014 through the end of October of last year. Many Christians have suffered because of ISIS, but the Yazidi people have perhaps suffered the worst. Gary Lane has more.
Few Iraqis have suffered worse treatment by the Islamic State than the Yazidis. Yazidis believe God gave control of the world to 7 angels. They do not believe in hell. ISIS considers them devil worshippers. Christians are often spared from death because ISIS views them as people of the book, the Bible. While ISIS has killed some Iraqi Christians and has seized their possessions and homes, the Yazidis have suffered worse persecution. ISIS has murdered many of their men and has taken Yazidi women as sex slaves. Last year, CBN News brought you the story of a young Yazidi woman we called Shanar. In August 2014, ISIS jihadists captured her as she fled Sinjar Mountain. They put her with about 100 other Yazidi girls, including some as young as 10 years old.
We're forcing the girls to convert to Islam and then marry ISIS members. They beat our legs, heads, and arms, demanding all of us to serve them or be used as sex slaves.
Shanar says ISIS fighters came to the house and offered the girls money for sex. Many of them were sold for as little as $1.
They were really determined to harm us. They abused us and took pleasure in it. Most of us wanted to die.
Some of the girls attempted suicide to escape the abuse. An alarming number succeeded. ISIS forced thousands of Yazidis from their homes, and many of them ended up in refugee camps like this one in northern Iraq. Fallah Hassan is one of them. ISIS captured him in Mosul, but he later escaped after witnessing the murder of a friend and other Yazidi men. Yazidi Jamil Chito lives alone in the camp. ISIS kidnapped his wife and 4 of his 11 children. Eventually they were rescued and now live in Germany. Other family members weren't as fortunate.
They were surrounded by 7 or 8 cars full of Daesh. They arrested all of them. They took the girls and the women, but then they blindfolded the rest of the family, including my brother, my brother's wife, cousin, and daughter-in-law, and they killed all of them right there.
Jamil hopes to see his surviving family members again after the city of Mosul is liberated by the Iraqi military and its allies. Gary Lane, CBN News.
The government of Saudi Arabia reportedly wants to impose stricter sentences, including the death penalty, on gay people who demonstrate their homosexuality in public and on social media. The Okaz newspaper reports the Saudi judiciary considered 35 cases of homosexuality in the last 6 months, along with 50 cases of cross-dressers. The paper also reports that a man was arrested for making sexual advances to other men online. A Christian legal group is offering to defend North Carolina's new bathroom law after the state's attorney general refused to do it. The Liberty Counsel is offering free labor for the General Assembly's Republican leaders against a federal lawsuit by transgender men. The law states that people must use the restroom of their biological gender, which some say discriminates against transgender people. Connecticut's governor has now joined leaders from other states in banning publicly funded travel to North Carolina. Other state governors include New York, Vermont, and Washington, as well as the mayor of San Francisco. Tornadoes struck in Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi last night. The twisters snapped trees and downed power lines, and emergency management officials say dozens of homes were damaged. One family in Mississippi is just grateful to be alive, racing to safety seconds before the tornado hit their property.
We took off running. I just heard nothing but a train. I said, this is it. We got in the house, and then that was it after that. Just stuff started falling. When we come running out of the shop, there was some tin coming flying off the top of the shop there. And it's nothing I've ever seen or been in.
The National Weather Service is warning about more severe weather as the storm system hits the Carolinas. George Mason University has renamed its law school to the Antonin Scalia School of Law in honor of the late Supreme Court Justice. The Board of Visitors announced the decision Thursday after the university received donations totaling $30 million. Law School Dean Henry N. Butler said in a statement that Justice Scalia was a, quote, symbol of conservative thought and embodies the values of the school. Mourners are paying their final respects to Mother Mary Angelica today. The Roman Catholic nun founded Eternal World Television Network, which reaches some 144 countries and millions of households. Mother Angelica had been declining in health since suffering a severe cerebral hemorrhage in 2001 and several strokes since then. She passed away on Easter Sunday. A funeral mass is being streamed online today. Mother Angelica was 92. Coming up, CBN News was the only TV news crew allowed on the set of God's Not Dead 2. We'll bring you an exclusive behind-the-scenes look. The movie God's Not Dead surprised Hollywood with a box office take of more than $60 million. That success opened the door for a sequel, which opens in theaters today. CBN News was the only television news crew allowed on set during filming. Ephraim Graham takes us behind the scenes of God's Not Dead 2.
Do you think you're smarter than me, Wheaton? Do you think there's any argument you can make that I won't have an answer for?
God's Not Dead's box office millions made it the highest grossing independent film in 2014. It also sparked a social media movement with a modest movie-making budget of just $2 million.
It's not us. We take no credit whatsoever. All praise to God.
Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman wrote the story that pitted a student against his professor.
What I want is for them to make their own choice. That's what God wants.
In a passionate debate about God's existence. The longtime writing partners are taking the concept further with God's Not Dead 2.
We pray on everything that we do, and the Lord inspires. He comes forward. And that is really the creative process.
The first movie, I think, kind of brought people to the point where they thought, you know what, someone should do something. I think the second movie points a little bit more to, I need to do something in my own life.
God's Not Dead was filmed on the campus of LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Much of the production for God's Not Dead 2 unfolds here in Little Rock, Arkansas, inside the state Supreme Court,
where the fictional script often feels like a page ripped from real-life headlines.
Mr. Kane will insist loudly and often that faith isn't on trial here. But that is exactly what is on trial.
Here, a public school teacher finds herself on trial for answering a student's question.
Yes. Isn't that sort of like what Jesus meant when he said that we should love our enemies?
Yes. The writer of the Gospel of Matthew records Jesus as saying, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you."
Melissa Joan Hart plays the teacher, Grace. CBN News was the only team invited to the set to watch her film scenes. We chatted with Melissa in between takes.
This was a calling for me to do this. I felt like this was a mission for me to go on and to, stand up for my beliefs and be a little bit louder about my faith.
Like her character, Grace, Melissa is a Christian.
I was raised a Catholic girl and married a Baptist, so I became a Presbyterian. But, all the while searching. And in the last few years, actually, I found a beautiful Bible study where I felt a lot of fellowship with the women and felt very loved and nurtured there. And it's really helped my walk.
You okay, Grace?
Yeah, I just can't stop thinking about Brooke. She's searching. She's hurting.
Yeah, that's the thing about atheism. It doesn't take away the pain, it just takes away the hope.
This isn't your typical sequel. Melissa leads an impressive cast of new faces that include Pat Boone as her grandfather.
You need to stop this immediately.
Robin Givens as the school principal.
I think someone's faith being put on trial in many respects is something that happens sort of in a strange way all the time in this world.
She didn't start her class with a blessing. She didn't lead her students in prayer. No.
And Jesse Metcalf plays her attorney.
He's not a religious man. He's not a Christian, but he sort of comes to respect Grace's religious integrity.
On a personal note, Metcalf recently talked about his faith, admitting he began a personal relationship with God 5 years ago when he became sober through Alcoholics Anonymous. The God's Not Dead tune and the Newsboys are among the few familiar returnees in the sequel.
Just a little spark in the dark can light up the whole scene. And God's Not Dead was that little train that could.
The storylines in both films are personal to the members of the popular Christian rock band.
Some people will look at that and say, oh yeah, you're just being too sensitive about your, what you believe in, or you're just being, but it really does exist. And I think there are millions and millions of people that resonate with that go through that every day. And I think we've gone through it to a certain extent, even being in Christian music. There's places that won't invite us to play on their late night TV shows or other type of things. You could have we can have a top 4 record on Billboard, but if you're talking about that Jesus person, we might not want you to come visit us.
Mr. Inlet, you are out of order. I charge you with contempt.
I accept the charge because I have nothing but contempt for these proceedings. If we're going to insist that a Christian's right to believe is subordinate to all other rights, then it's not a right.
God's Not Dead is no longer just a film. It's a PureFlix franchise.
God's Not Dead 1 dealt with the existence of God. Is God real? Is he not? God's Not Dead 2 deals with who was he? And if he was Jesus, was he man, myth, or Messiah? Ultimately, my hope is to develop an army of people that can talk about their faith intelligently and really take that to the world.
And the conversation continues. Michael Scott and his PureFlix team are already at work on God's Not Dead 3.
So now the government can determine what we can and can't preach at our churches.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Little Rock, Arkansas.
Up next, the story of God as told by National Geographic. See what the network tried to discover about some of mankind's most common questions. It is a question every soul wrestles with at some point. Who is God? And now the National Geographic Channel is trying to tackle that age-old question with the help of actor Morgan Freeman. Angela Zatopek has this look at the network's new series exploring faith and religion.
Is there life after death? Morgan Freeman takes viewers on a journey to uncover questions like who is God and all the different questions in between. I'm Angela Zatopek in New York City for National Geographic's premiere of The Story of God. Traveling over 100,000 miles to 7 different countries and 40 cities, Freeman takes viewers to the world's most historic religious sites.
This is going to be quite the adventure.
We started with the 3 Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and that was kind of what we anchored it around, and then we decided what was going to work within the constructs of only 6 hours.
Each individual episode addresses some of mankind's most asked questions, showcasing how different religions answer them.
Is there an apocalypse? Will there be an apocalypse? What is the apocalypse? And it's different. Did you know that? The apocalypse in this religion is different from the apocalypse over here.
It makes sense casting Freeman as the face of the series, since he's perhaps Hollywood's most popular voice of God from the hit films Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty. What was your religious background like growing up? Did you grow up in church or?
I didn't grow up in church, but I at an early age, I must have gone to church 4 or 5 times as a kid. Personally, I was always kind of intimidated by ritual. My grandmother was very into, not religion, but God.
Right, a relationship.
A relationship with the Almighty.
In exploring these questions, Freeman met with different religious leaders, academics, and archaeologists from around the world, including Houston megachurch pastor Joel Osteen.
Who is God?
I believe God is our Father, the Creator, somebody that gives us purpose and destiny.
Freeman immersed himself for 40 days and 40 nights in various rituals and religious experiences, visiting sites from the pyramids to Jerusalem. The series airs globally in 171 countries in 45 different languages. From New York City, I'm Angela Zatopek with CBN News.
Well, the weekend is here, so it's time for our regular family-friendly movie reviews with Bob Waliszewski. He is with Plugged In Online, the entertainment review department at Focus on the Family. Mark Martin spoke earlier with Bob about some good options now hitting theaters.
Bob, let's start with the new Christian sequel, God's Not Dead 2. How does it compare to the first film?
You know, I like the first one, and I like the second one as well. Both of them, to me, had believable stories. This one we gave a 4.5 out of 5 for family friendliness. So it has just about everything. I will say the first one surprised me with how much it made at the box office. It made $60.7 million. Wow. Of course, it remains to see how this one will do. But there's a lot of... let's put up pent-up excitement. People that know about the first one, liked it, that are thinking about it. I think this one's going to do well, too, and deservedly so. This is not a cheesy Christian film. It's a fictional film dealing with a high school teacher who answers a question about Jesus from a classroom. But it's so believable because I think many of us have either gone through that in our own lives or have we read it in the newspaper and said, this could so easily happen.
Yeah, well, I love the first one, so looking forward to seeing the second one. In other movies, The Young Messiah has now been out 3 weeks, but it's only made a little over $6 million. Bob, it seems very low for a Christian film out during the Easter season. What happened?
You know, I really puzzled with that one myself. I'm not sure. I think because it dealt with the boyhood of Jesus Christ rather than his adult life, which we know very clearly about because of the Bible, because it dealt with a period in his life that we don't know much about, I think there was a lot of people that stayed away. And I understand that because I admit the first time, and I saw this film 3 times, the first time I saw this film, when we were invited to see it, I thought, I'm not going to like it because it deals with a period that that's not in the scriptures. But I was surprised how well I liked it, even though it is fiction. I think there was probably a lot of people that shared my initial, concern or potential concern.
A film came out last weekend that we haven't chatted about yet, My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2. Plugged In gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Sounds like this one might have some family viewing potential, would you say?
It does. It's not a perfect film, and there's a little bit of, I'll call it a little bit of crude dialogue, a little bit of sensual dialogue. But even when they're being a little bit out there on that, they're doing it for reasons of chastity rather than reasons of permissiveness and sensuality, which, anyways, it's a very pro-family film, as was the original. In fact, this one I liked even better because if you might remember in the first one, the couple has a sensual situation outside of marriage that was disappointing. We don't see it this time, which I was grateful for. So I like this one better. Not a perfect film. I would suggest people read our longer review if they're thinking of going, but I do think it has potential. A 3.5 out of 5 says it has potential.
Okay, Bob Waliszewski with PluggedIn.com. Thanks so much as always, Bob.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day and God bless.